Warhammer Space Marine 2. Didn't think I'd ever see a sequel to the original, if I'm being honest. What's it been, like 10 years? But here we are, 13 years later with a sequel. And boy, it's something alright. I feel like I've been waiting on a good 40k game for a very long time. There's been plenty of those like little titles that appear off the IP every now and again, you know, like Bolt Gun or Chaos Gate. But this one feels like the AAA a lot of people, myself included, have been waiting on, and Emperor be praised, it does not disappoint. Released on September 9th or 6th if you bought the fancy edition. For the starting price of £55 you get to experience the next chapter of Titus's story, plunging him into a Tyranid invasion with a brand new squad fighting across 3 different planets, eventually encountering the arch-enemy in the process. The game features 3 main modes: the campaign, operations, and PvP. Because of the way I went through the game, I'll be talking about operations last, as was the last mode out of the 3 I went into. The campaign, how is it? It's good. It's a really good, solid experience. At the start of the game, you're given your 4 options for your difficulty: easy, normal, hard, which is the intended one, and brutal. I went with the intended, as it's written in the Codex Astartes not to show cowardice. Dropping in on your own as a member of the Death Watch, isolated from your team, you must try to reunite and complete your mission. Over the way, the game introduces you to all the mechanics and how to play it, like a tutorial should, leading all the way up to a small-scale example of how the Tyranid swarms work, which I think is part of Saber's swarm engine. I'm not going to sugarcoat it though, the tutorial beat me up bad. Like, not once, twice, but 3 times the tutorial killed me. I mostly run that up to easing into the game in the somewhat finicky default key bindings. X for lock-on, C for parrying, and V for swapping weapons is a rather interesting set of defaults, but nothing a rebind can't fix. Just for like future note, the lock-on system, I actually found it to be more of a hindrance than a good thing. Like, I ended up never using it at all, other than the times that I tried it in that tutorial and got my ass beat for it. Other than the keybinds, you get to see just how well crafted and beautiful the world design is. Like, all 3 of the worlds you fight on look amazing, and they all feel different. From the first world's like jungle landscape with all of the Tyranids, to the infested cityscape of the second planet, all the way up to the heavily corrupted third planet, where you'll see a lot of the arch enemy. The guns sound fantastic. They are meaty, heavy, and gritty sounding bolt guns, mixed in with the powerful sound effects as you execute all of the enemies you come across. I love the executes. It's one of the main selling points for me in games like this. Those little cinematic moments, like, they remind me of Yakuza Heat actions. And there's a ton of them as well. Like, from cracking open one of the Tyranid drone's heads if you're trying to rip open a Terry's chocolate orange, all the way up to just beating the living snot out of the various boss enemies the game throws at you. A lot of these are also weapon subjective. If you're using a chainsword, it will be different than if you're using, say, a thunderhammer. I can't even tell you how many of them there are in total. Going off of the Steam achievements, there's one, the Art of Dismemberment, which is to do at least 50 of them. That's quite a lot, but I'm sure there's more than that. I think maybe going up to 60, 70 on maybe 99% of the enemies. I know there's one enemy that you can't execute, which is kinda sad, but there's a reason for it. But the real question, how does it play? How does it feel? The best way I can describe it, it's like playing one of those OG Gears of War games. You grab some developers from the 360 era where Gears and Halo were in their prime and said, make a Space Marine game. That's what it feels like, and it's brilliant. There were, however, 2 standout things I think are missing, or maybe overlooked, or maybe just a design choice in general. Firstly, the game avoids using a cover system, just like in the original. But if it's like the original, why does that make it a problem? Well, the range units in this game are, how do I word this best, prominent. You will quickly notice how fast these guys just chew through your armor and HP, and other than killing them, there's no real way to avoid any of this damage, and boy does it begin to mount up when some of the other special ranged units appear. You could argue this is a range damage problem rather than a cover problem, but it's a mixed bag. I don't consider it a problem per se, but I did notice and feel its absence. The other one, and probably the more impactful one, is your shoulder locked. Unless I overlook something in the settings, you are fixed to aiming over your right shoulder. I think it's a bit odd for a third-person game to restrict the camera in such a way, but only really becomes an issue in PvP, since with any third-person competitive game mode, camera angle manipulation is a very big part of it, and being on the dominant shoulder side of a peak is considerably more advantageous than being on your opposite shoulder. After finishing the tutorial sequence, you're then introduced to the other main characters and side characters of the game, starting with the ever-watchful eyes of Chaplain Quintus, then Acheran, the new captain of the Ultramarines, who then finally introduces you to your new battle brothers, Sergeant Gadriel and Brother Chiron. This all takes part on the battle barge. Consider this like a hub world for the game. I have a love-hate relationship with these. I love the idea of moving about the ship, exploring all the details left in an interactive way, rather than just looking at menu screens or lobbying systems. But in most cases, these come at a compromise of some UI usability or weird design choices. Unfortunately, there are some problems with it in this case, but I'll discuss them when we get to PvP. Regardless, from here the game opens up to you, and you can now freely choose what you want to do. The game is fully cooperative, with yourself and 2 friends being able to play through all of the modes together, even the campaign. I went through the entirety of the campaign with 2 of my friends, and we thoroughly enjoyed the experience. However, we ran into, let's call them issues, since I don't think it's bad enough to be considered a problem. It just rubs me the wrong kind of way. The first one being medkits, and well, health in general. Despite the healing system in place, where you can heal on melee hitting, recovering lost health similar to that of like Bloodborne, the ranged units are just too prominent for it to matter. If you're busy meleeing a swarm, those guys are just tearing through you. So we ended up coasting through most of the missions with next to no health at all. It got to the point where we were just going through the missions as fast as possible, ignoring a lot of the beautifully crafted areas, or ignoring the visual storytelling happening in missions, because we were competitively and aggressively hunting for medkits.
Oh my god, medkit! No, I got stuck on a guardsman! No way!
Get actually fucked.
If there were some in some areas, it was usually only 2, leaving one of us on life support, praying we don't get downed instantly into the next encounter. We did run into an area I would say is a problem. I hope it was just a one-off or it gets changed, and by the end of the game we never saw it ever again, so I assume it's just a bug. In the 3rd or 4th mission, you need to do a simple survival task, protecting an elevator as it moves you towards the next destination. Simple mission concept, so what was the problem? We died the first time we done it, and for whatever reason the items we picked up on this elevator glitched out. Anything that we picked up in the previous run we couldn't use anymore. They were there visually, but we just couldn't interact with them. This included the ammo, the medkits, even the guns. So we tried again and again and again to get through this part, and each time we either died due to healing, ran out of ammo, ran out of grenades, just because nothing was usable. The ranged enemies also were in what I would consider to be a really unfair or unintended place. The swarms are meant to scale the sides of the moving elevator, but the ranged units could sit outside on these little platforms out of the boundaries, and they could essentially shoot through the terrain at you. And it just felt like they were just shooting you just through the objects on the map, because you genuinely couldn't see them. The only time I managed to find and see them is when I got within melee distance of the platform's edge, just to see them on this little slope, which would be very difficult to just shoot conventionally. Now, I've tried to avoid as much detail as possible, since I think the game is great, and it's something I believe you should go and play and experience, but there are some things I want to discuss when it comes to the ending, I'm not sure if what I'm saying would be considered a spoiler, but just take it as a spoiler warning anyway. I'll just flash something on the screen to say that it's over. So the ending, it has to be one of the best endings for a game I've seen in a while. But there's one detail that annoyed me a bit. In the final moments of the game, it kinda has an identity crisis. It's trying so hard to fan service that it goes a bit haywire. It's not that it's a problem, I think the way that they've done it is probably the best way they could, but the game turned into almost like snippets of gameplay and snippets of movie cutscening. And I really mean like snippets. You would get like 10 seconds of a gameplay segment and then 10 seconds of a cutscene segment, and it kept swapping back and forth again and again and again. It wants the player to feel like they are there in this really cool scene and gives them it for 10 seconds before increasing its intensity in the cutscene after. Versus, say, making it a full gameplay or making it a full cutscene. I don't really know what I think of it, as I think I would have enjoyed both versions, but I think this version is the most fulfilling. But it just feels off in how fast it swaps between the two states. Overall though, the ending is fantastic. A satisfying ending as one of the large plot twists is revealed at the very end, leading into an obvious cliffhanger, leaving the door open to DLC or just to bait out a third entry. See you in another decade for that one, I guess. To summarise the campaign as a whole though, it's a great experience. I loved all the interactions between the Battle Brothers and all the dynamic changes and interactions that happened inside the Battle Barge, between hinting at story changes, mechanics, and systems, as well as the overall reflection of the story progressing. Only 6 missions total, but these boys average at about 1 hour each, with some being a little longer. So maybe 8 hours of story to play through? That doesn't even consider replaying the game on the hardest difficulty. I'd say that's a pretty good time span for a modern game. One thing I think needs to be said as well, as I went through it with friends, I didn't see much of the solo experience. But I've been told that the AI is very bad for single player. More often than not, completely avoiding your bot squad members, instead focusing every ranged unit, special and boss entirely on you, which might contribute to the whole game's too difficult posts I've been seeing around. Next up is PvP. It's actually pretty damn enjoyable, putting the Astartes up against our archenemy, the heretical Astartes or Chaos Marines. It's got a lot of good things about it, but it's got its fair share of bad aspects too, most of which I think are tied to the game as a core product rather than a fault of the mode itself. Could even maybe call it an oversight on the devs' part to some degree. Overall, it's a solid mode and enjoyable gameplay experience. Just like the campaign, the gunplay feels really good. The gameplay itself is split down into 3 modes, which is alright as far as most multiplayer games go, those being Seize Ground, Capture and Control, and Annihilation. Seize Ground is more or less your domination mode. 3 points appear spaced out on the map, and you want to control them to gain score until you hit the victory threshold, making sure to prevent your opponents from doing the same. Capture and Control is more or less King of the Hill. 1 point spawns and persists for about 100 seconds. Hold it to score points. Once the timer runs out, it will spawn again in another area of the map. And finally, Annihilation is just your standard TDM mode. Disappointingly though, these 3 game modes only have 3 maps total to play on, which is kinda lacking in my opinion. So the maps we do have are Mausoleum, Cathedrum, and Bastion. Most of them are as they sound really. Mausoleum is kind of like a crypt burial site, probably taking inspiration from the later half of the campaign on the Third World. Cathedrum is, well, a cathedral, I guess you could say. It's kind of like a library, a big monument building of some kind, probably taking inspiration from the Second Planet. And Bastion is kind of like your frontier outpost in the jungles, following the pattern, probably taking inspiration from the First Planet. So the multiplayer uses a more traditional class-based role system. There are 6 of these classes in total: Tactical, Assault, Vanguard, Bulwark, Sniper, and Heavy. Each of these classes has their own unique ability, similar to that of the campaign, and they are a mirror to that of Operations, which we'll talk about later. These abilities further differentiate the jobs from each other, giving them more of their own intended playstyles, strengths, and weaknesses. For example, the lower mobility classes tend to be more armoured, allowing them to sustain fighting much longer. Starting with the Tactical Marine, which is more or less your bog standard unit, they have the largest weapon variety of all the classes and access to their Auspex scan, which is kind of like a pulsing radar, if you will. Shoot at an area and in a sphere it will mark enemies and make them more vulnerable to damage from your team. The Assault is your jump pack shock trooper, access to a handful of melee weapons to pick from. Their job, in my opinion, is more so to flank the enemy with aerial mobility, engaging in with diving attacks and into melee combos with the big thunder hammer. The Vanguard is the second of the mobility jobs, having access to a grappling hook, allowing them to traverse terrain quickly and access otherwise inaccessible areas for the other non-mobile jobs. You can use it to climb to higher floors on maps with high ground or onto ledges, giving you a strong position to fight from. But this is also an effective offensive tool. You can grapple onto enemies, pulling you towards them and hitting them with a light melee attack on contact. This used to stun them, but they changed that in one of the patches since launch. But this puts you in a position to just either gun them down at close range, or just beat them to death afterwards. The Bulwark is pretty much your dedicated tank class, and is one of the most irritating classes to face so far in the game. It has 4 armor and a dedicated shield, which blocks pretty much every projectile thrown at it, so you can just stand still and just watch them just shoot every single bullet in you and it'll do nothing. To top it off, its ability is a chapter banner, which is a massive AoE armor recovery for all allies in its vicinity, and it is very, very powerful. I think it's probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest, one-on-one class as well. If you just find yourself against one, you're just never going to be able to use any offensive weapons against them other than crack grenades if you actually take them. The Sniper is pretty self-explainable. It has access to the 2 sniper rifles in the game and access to a stealth cloak. Credits to the dev for actually putting in a good stealth too. Like, it's not the weak shimmer stuff that you see in other games. You could use the stealth and stand still and people would walk right past you. Even if they're in combat, they might struggle to keep track of you in comparison to just any other type of game where it's like, right, I can see the Gaussian blur just like move across the screen. He's obviously there. Finally, the last class is the Heavy, which has access to the special weapons you find in the campaign, like the Heavy Bolter, and the big boy plasma incinerator, and the multi-melter. So these weapons just shred anything you're aiming at, but the problem is that it's very slow and you have to aim down the sights in order to utilize the most out of the weapon. It's not very good for hip fire shooting. The Iron Halo, which is its special ability, is a 180 degree shield, allowing you and your teammates to shoot through, but blocks opposing projectiles from the enemy until it either expires or it runs out of health. But to be honest, it has a lot of health. It's not going to run out anytime soon. You need to be very much dueling it for a while to get rid of it. All of these are also mirrored on the Chaos Marine side. There's no real difference between them, to be honest, other than just the weapon names and how they look. But there is a massive difference between the customization of them. I will give them props as to the customization of the characters in multiplayer. It's fantastically fleshed out with options to change absolutely everything about your Marine. To start it off, all classes have 7 unique armor sets unlocked by winning games or completing operations. If you don't like them or other aspects, you can pick and mix between them by creating your own custom armor set, choosing the pieces you do like and combining them to create a more genuinely unique Marine. But it wouldn't be a true Space Marine game if you couldn't rep your colours. At current, there are 30 chapters that you can pick from. However, 12 of these chapters are tied to DLC, the Ultramarines Cosmetic Pack, which, looking at Steam, currently isn't viable standalone, but instead is only available through the Season Pass. Not a good impression for day 1 if it's only cosmetic. Regardless of that, also prevents you from using their specific shade of colouring, as you can individually colour parts of your Marine. So those colours are also locked away. Finally, the last piece of customization is the weapons. Every single one of the Astartes weapons comes with a variety of cosmetic skins that are unlocked by winning PvP matches. I personally dislike this being tied to wins, as it removes a lot of the individual ability out of the equation. Doesn't matter how good you are with a weapon, how many kills you get, no win, no progression. To me, it lacks the aspects of old COD games gave you. If you saw the skin for the weapon on someone, you know they've put the time in to get the headshots for it, or whatever the condition they need to meet to obtain it. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but to me it takes a lot of the momentum out of me knowing that my progression is tied to my team's performance rather than my own. With weapons being shared between classes, I end up unlocking cosmetics on weapons I've never even used. But when I said before that there was a major difference between normal Space Marines and their Chaos counterparts, I really meant it. It's genuinely rather sad how stripped the Chaos Marines are for customization in comparison to their counterparts. In comparison to the Space Marines' 30 chapters to pick from, they have 6. None of their classes have any armor sets, so no decorations to put on or change, in comparison to the 7 sets each class from the Space Marines get. Lastly, none of their weapons get any skins either. While the Space Marines get about 5 each on average across all weapons, it's a shocking difference between the two, which makes me wonder if it's because they will then sell the customizations for them later. Say a Champions of Chaos pack, which includes custom armor sets, each tailored to the respective gods or to the respective fallen corrupted chapters. Some of that does kind of exist as base, with the Chaos Vanguard taking inspiration from Khorne, and the Chaos Bulwark taking influence from Nurgle. There is another explanation for this massive difference though as well, which is related to operations, and I'll reference back to this point when I get there. Other than the shortage of maps, there are 4 main things that annoy me about the PvP at current, and a few other smaller things that just kinda bug me. The first main thing is the lacking of shoulder swapping. I mentioned it in the campaign section, but this is where it truly hurts. Dominant shoulder peeking is just horrible to deal with, as people can shoot you with near minimal body exposure, and if you happen to be on the bad shoulder, then good luck to you winning that skirmish. Second is the lacking of team rebalancing or general swapping of sides. I think so far every game I've done, if I remain in the same lobby, has me and the same people no matter what, and has me on the same side, Astartes or Chaos Marine, every single time. Considering how the progression outside of leveling is all tied to wins, if my team got beat badly, there's no reason to stick around, as most likely the outcome's just going to repeat, and you're going to have no progression as a result. Third is the lack of ways to test things. Everything in the game has its stats represented by sliders and numbers, which I suppose is nice for easy to consume information, but there isn't a conventional way to test without doing it live in game. Say for example, what's the most effective melee combo for fastest TTK? How much damage does a certain weapon do as a headshot? Other than to break guard or to one-shot as an assault on Thunderhammer, I don't know if I should ever value doing a heavy attack over just light spamming. It would be nice to have the facilities to find out that info without resorting to just doing it in-game. They did recently release the little dueling arena, which I hoped would have little dummies inside it to hit, which would give you a stat number to show you damage, but unless you have another person there to actively soak the hit and tell you how much damage they took, the area is relatively just empty. It is there just to fight other people, and that's it. Finally, one of the things I think would be an oversight that I mentioned before is, due to the game being at core built around 3-person squads, you can't go into matchmaking with more than 2 others at a time. Despite multiplayer game modes supporting more than 3 players, you're hardlocked to that squad size, which I think is a bit sad really. The problem being further emphasized due to the lack of a private match functionality, so you can't necessarily just have a game with just your friends in it. As for the smaller things though, I think the lack of executions in PvP are just a massive missed win, especially with how we have the executions for the Chaos Marines in the campaign, but I do understand it would probably be a nightmare to balance and make work, but if they managed to do it, I think it would have been a really nice addition. Lastly is the tracking and progression as a whole. None of your stats are tracked in any regard, no KDA, no medals, no win-loss, absolutely none of it's tracked. I consider this stuff to be sort of standard in multiplayer games now. In a more frustrating way though, this also applies to the win unlocks. For all I know it might be a bug, but none of my skins or armor sets unlock conditions change. My tooltips showing my condition is win X games with the weapon, but after a win it remains X games. If it's not a bug on my end, it seems a bit lazy making the tooltips static. Account leveling is also equally as frustrating. There's no convenient way to see what you unlock at each level without manually running through all of the classes and weapons just to see their unlock level for each one individually. Finally, there is one other leveling system that even now still doesn't make much sense to me. Each class has its own independent level, or maybe proficiency might be the better word for it. This ranks up as you play the class specifically, but to my understanding, other than the little Roman numeral beside your name going up each level, it serves next to no real purpose at all. To sum it all up though, the PvP is still a good laugh to play, a bit lacking in a lot of areas, but still fun to spend an hour or two in with friends. I think it could benefit from a fair few changes. One of the biggest takeaways that I had after going through it a few times is that it felt kinda lacking. Maybe perks similar to that we see in COD might add some spice to it, encouraging other playstyles. But even if they were just to add some more maps and modes and some out of match tracking systems, would be a nice and welcome addition to give it some longevity. Operations. Now I saved this one for last, as to be honest not only was it the last mode I tried, but it's the one that kinda surprised me the most. I was expecting this to be kind of like your Modern Warfare 2 Spec Ops missions, and boy was I sorely mistaken. This is where the meat of the game is, to be honest, and a lot of the things that I questioned before tend to stem from this mode. So operations are sub-missions that co-align with the story. On the various missions you perform with Titus, there are support missions that have to be undertaken at the same time by up to 2 other squads of Ultramarines. These 2 squads conveniently fill the lineup for the 6 classes that you play in both Operations and PvP. To sum it up in a fast way, this mode is a smaller, in my opinion, better version of say Vermintide or Darktide. You drop into a mission with a goal to complete and extract upon doing so. On your way you might encounter the random boss enemies similar to that of Vermintide or Darktide. There are various collectibles across the map, both for lore and some for progression as well. Gene seeds acting similar to the concept of tomes or grimoires, granting you like a large XP boost if you extract with it. In exchange you lose it on a relic slot. It's kinda the same. And there's armory data, which is kinda like your out of game currency system for progression. The difficulties for these missions though kinda spike a bit. When I went through it with my friends, we went into difficulty 1 and thought, oh, this is a snooze. And then we went into difficulty 3 and we got our asses handed to us. What was once a relatively easy kill on some of the enemies with say the last sniper, which is the class I started with, turned into a 1 shot to a 3 to 4 shot. But after getting more used to the system, playing it a lot more, unlocking all the various perk trees that Operations has, it suddenly became a breeze and you could cruise through any of the initial 4 difficulties with, to be honest, once you learn the systems you could do it with grey weapons and even 2 to 3 skills. Once you just get the hang of what you need to do, the priority targets, and just operate safely without putting yourself in a position of dying. But yeah, going on about the skills and perks that I mentioned, this is where a lot of the progression of the game is, and to be honest this is where I think the development team put most, if not all, of their efforts. With the aspects of this mode splintering off just to make PvP is more or less a byproduct. So every class has its own leveling system, and with each level you unlock perks to boost not only your own effectiveness but your squad's as well. So your initial one is kind of like your gear core skills, then you get given an option for your squad skills, and then you get a selection of skills for your actual utility, like your ability that your class offers. Finally topping it off with like a signature skill, closest as you can get to an ultimate really. It's more like a big modifier. In some cases, some classes have the ability of like a guardian angel from League. If you die, you will instead just get your health and armor back, and it'll go on a cooldown. On top of this skill tree, you also have your weapon mastery system. So as you use a weapon, it accumulates mastery, and as you master the weapons, you will progress through the 4 tiers of weapons. So you've got your grey weapons, green weapons, purple weapons, and then finally your legendary weapons, all of which have appropriate stat increases, and this is where it comes into play all of the different weapon looks for the Astartes that I mentioned in PvP. So as you upgrade from these weapons, their appearance and looks change. They become more grander, they become more like out there, more gilded, more golden, and they've simply just ported these skins over into the PvP and just let you unlock them through wins. It's why, in my opinion, the Chaos don't have any weapon customization because, well, there's no Chaos operations. So if they were to add Chaos operations, I imagine these would also get ported over into the PvP. But alongside these skins and changing stats, the weapons have their own perk trees. If you master every single weapon, you'll be given mastery points as you go along, and these can be spent on a variety of upgrades for the weapons, which could be extra magazine sizes or total magazine capacity, how many rounds you can carry. It could be something as simple as damage increases or headshot damage increases. When it comes to the melee weapons, this can be similar to that of getting new or upgraded versions of your buttons. So it might increase your combo from 4 to 5, it might change a button, it might give it increased a radius of effect, it might let you do it twice in the way of like the ground slams or ground pounds that exist. Since you have access to all the weapons from the get-go and you can just choose which one you want to play at any single point in time, it removes a lot of the elements that I personally disliked about Vermintide and Darktide, and that was the RNG from drops. You're fully aware of what you're going to get, what you're going to spec from the very start, and you're not relying on, say, oh, my game, it dropped me a legendary, but it's not for the weapon that I like to use, but I have to use it anyway because it's better than what I was previously using. It doesn't have to do any of the perk RNG or juggle any of the currency to reroll or daily farming. You can just essentially play the way you want to play, and you're not going to get penalized for it for doing so. One of the other things that surprised me is that a lot of the locations in these operations are unique as well. They're not reused campaign areas, and in some cases there's similarities, and obviously they all have to operate on the same 3 planets, but they feel completely different. They feel actually very fresh in comparison coming off of the campaign. And it's not just the locations as well, it's also the enemies inside of these operations too. So as it stands, some of them have unique bosses that you don't even face in the campaign. You see them, you might interact with them briefly in the campaign, but you never distinctively go up against them. So this could be the Hive Tyrant, for example. It's referenced in the story, but you don't actually see it until the operations. Same goes for the Helldrake. And as of recently, since they've added the 7th operation, and the name of the monster is honestly, it's gone. I can't remember exactly what its name is. I think it's the Hierophant. It's an absolute massive bio-titan, is the best way I suppose I can say it. And they are planning to add more operations, and I assume more monsters will come with it. Hopefully it's more than just boss monsters. Like I'd like to see more extremist level, yeah, extremist level enemies to come out alongside, say, like the Lictor or the Scarab Terminators. As it stands though, the operations mode I think is fantastic. Like you could spend a very long time just chewing through this, bringing all of the classes up to max level of 25, or maxing out all of the weapons. There are 7 operations at current, and they quite recently increased or added the next difficulty, difficulty 5. And it feels very good, in my opinion. Like I mentioned before, that you could sort of breeze through 1 through 4, provided you knew what you were doing with very minimal like class and gear. But the 5th difficulty is where it very much picks up to the point where I'd almost say this is where you want to be. Like it is a good enough challenge that makes you feel like you are engaging with it, rather than just turning your brain off and running through. Like I swear in the other difficulty, difficulty 4, you could just run ahead and one of your one of your squad is busy fighting off like a lictor on their own, and you won't even know that lictor's there until you see it pop up in the chat at the bottom that they've killed it, and they're like, oh, yeah, maybe should have helped with that. It's not like that in the 5th one. The fact that it spawns 3 special enemies at the same time, like you are in the thick of it, and you kind of want to plan and build around it, like picking the correct weapons, maybe the correct classes, perking the weapon properly so that you're getting damage boosts against the correct enemy types. There's a lot to think about, and I think that's a good way to keep the game interesting, rather than just turning your brain off and just going through it without really much consequence or problems. Again though, with the addition of this new difficulty and the planning that kind of goes into achieving success in them, again I want to reference back to the whole dueling arena and the lack of ability to test. It's a lot more prominent now when you have to consider how the weapon stats actually evaluate your damage, as well as taking into account your perks, and then taking into account your weapon perk tree as well. Suddenly there's a lot of unknown variables that it would be really nice to know. So taking the sniper for example, would a maxed out las fusel be stronger or better than say the bolt sniper at taking down any of the elite enemies? There isn't really a good way to see that in a very digestible format. When it comes to the melee weapons, when I mentioned that they could get combo chain changes, increasing the combo or changing the button, there isn't anything that lets you see the damage comparison between the two. Again, I feel like just having a dummy that, or just even like the Dark Tide arena, where it just has all the enemies there for you to just shoot into or melee, which lets you get an idea of just how your damage is being reflected across them, how many shots it takes to kill, how many melee hits it takes to kill, and so on. I feel like that would be a very good change that they could implement. There is meant to be prestiges, I believe, coming to the PvE for operations as well, somewhere down in the future. I think it's on the roadmap, but I do remember them saying something along those lines of adding a prestige, and hopefully it adds some cosmetics as well, like alongside the final difficulty that they added. For completing those ones, you are given unique cosmetics for your marine to customize, provided you've completed them on the hardest difficulty. As your sort of, here's your medal. I hope they keep going down that path, and I hope prestiges, if they do bring them out, does follow that path of giving you something like a reward for doing so as well. Now, before I can sum up everything, there is one other topic I need to mention, and that's the game's future. And to do that, I'm essentially just going to be talking over the roadmap. Now, it's taken me so long to actually finish making this review that 2 of these chunks, except the Dark Angels cosmetic pack, has actually already came out. So ignoring the first two, as we go into the next year, we will see a bunch more content updates. Season 3 will bring a lot of new stuff to the table, another new operation, which will have a new enemy type in it. Again, I hope this is a more conventional enemy type rather than a boss. It brings the prestige system, which will be nice for replayability. If you're only interested in, say, playing one class, you don't really have much to do after you max it out and max all its weapons and beat the final difficulty. I hope it brings more unique cosmetics with it as well to show off that prestige flair. It will also bring a new PvP game mode and a new map or potentially maps. This addresses one of the main feedbacks I had about the PvP mode overall, about how bare bones it was. So this is nice. Lastly, it brings with it a Battle Barge expansion, which, to be honest, I have no idea what that will actually do. If I was to guess, I would associate an expansion of the hub world to facilitate like a big new addition to the game. It might be an area associated with prestiging, or maybe it's a staging point for what they will be releasing in Season 4, the Horde mode. And to be honest, I'm very much looking forward to that Horde mode, especially if they go down the route of Gears of War 3's Horde mode, where you could build placeables and defenses on the map. That I think would be just really cool overall. Other than that, Season 4 brings another new enemy type and another new weapon to play with. I personally wasn't too interested in the Neo Volkite pistol they added, but consistent beam weapons have never really been my thing. Alongside all of these though, if you have the season pass like I do, you'll be getting a bunch of cosmetics to play with as each season drops. Since we don't have the Dark Angels one yet, we don't really have anything to see what the champion packs and weapon skin packs offer, but if it's following the suit with the Ultramarine cosmetic packs, we might see up to 12 more chapter variants added with each one. So this brings me more or less to the end of the review. So lightning fast TLDR time, the game is fantastic. It has some issues like all games do. Nothing can truly be perfect after all, as one person's 10 out of 10 could be different for somebody else. But to me, with all the game has to offer and how well crafted a lot of the elements are, I personally think the game is, say, 8.5 leaning into a 9 out of 10. The aspects I think set back is mainly PvP elements, the lacking of a private match functionality to play the multiplayer purely with my friends, or at least fill out a full team rather than only 3 of us being able to play together. The lacking of stat tracking, yes, I know it's a minor gripe, but I like seeing how well I perform on each class, or how well I use their respective weapons. Maybe in the future those stats could even be used to make more engaging cosmetics that give the game more longevity in the form of goals to accomplish. So yeah, if you're a fan of the 40k universe, it's 100% worth picking up. I've heard it might even be made lore canon as well, so yeah, if you're one of the lore junkies, it's now canonized, potentially. I believe the game has an optimistic future, hopefully of them even continuing the game into a second year, maybe even more. I'm very much looking forward to see how they handle the Horde mode though. If it's similar to Gears of War's one, it will no doubt help me get that 41k kills achievement, as that's the last thing standing between me and 100% completion. For those of you that have survived to the very end though, I do have one last thing to ask. This is the first time I've done a video review, and to be honest, I didn't think it'd be as much work as it was. So I'd love to hear any kind of feedback and comments about what you thought, like good things and bad. Maybe I talked too much about one point, or didn't mention or bring up another point. Even something as simple as, say, mic quality, or the volume, or hell, even my tone of voice. Just any information like that would make a big difference in the way I approach making these things going forwards. I do plan to be more active on Twitch, streaming games to then review them in a similar format to this, and then maybe even look into uploading the stream VODs here or onto a separate channel, so that you can share my experience with the game as I play it. So yeah, thank you for watching, and see you later.